So, reading up on this Attorney General business, while I've been researching on it, I've just had an insight, actually, quite a major insight. Because there's a lot of, at the moment, people are arguing like what the law is. But this is the thing. It turns out, actually, that the Attorney General is summoned as an assistant to the House of Lords, right, not as a member. Because the members receive separate summons, right? And actually, none of the Attorney Generals were members of the Lords through the 1700s, but some historian made out they were, but they weren't. Two of the Attorney Generals were not members of either house. They weren't. Apparently, the Attorney General does not actually have to be a member of the Commons. Two of the Attorney Generals weren't even members of the Commons by the looks of it, but one of those two, after he served as Attorney General, he actually was put into the House of Lords after, right? But the position is like the it's like there are assistants and there are attendants, right? You know, like you got the Sergeant at Arms and the Black Rod and things like that. It's in that category of non-members because they can't speak as a member of the House, right? So they're not summoned as a member, right? Now, most of the Attorney Generals have been members of the Commons, but when they attend the Lords, they're summoned as an assistant, and there's certain rules for whether they can be at the bar or not. In this book I'm reading now, it says that they can't be at the bar, but later on in the standing orders of the House of Lords, it says that they're allowed to sit on the woolsack, right? Now, getting back onto this issue, now this is a separate issue. I've just been talking about the Attorney General. Now I'm going to talk about this, right? What I've realised, and I just had this insight while I was reading this book now, there's a lot of channels out there now. You know, like I said, that this kind of like social media revolution, yeah? The social media revolution that is just kind of like sprung up from people had websites, usually kept to their own countries, a little bit of intermingling between countries, but like for things like electoral processes, you know, there was no, Americans, you know, there were English websites, right? English websites, which were kind of like independent. And there might have been a few political forums, right? But nothing like what Facebook, YouTube, and, you know, the Instagram and all these big platforms have joined the whole world together. And everyone's kind of got carried away with it without really properly considering what they're doing. Now, there's two categories that I want to mention. Well, I suppose there's also independent political campaigns like petitioning campaigns. But primarily, we've got elections, which have got their own special rules and law, right? And I've just actually been reading that the effects of one election which is issued cannot carry over to another. So when you've got advertisements out for one election and it's over, if they're having an effect and influence the whole year round and then continuing to the next election, you've actually got two separate elections having the same effect, which you're not actually allowed to do that. But the MPs are going onto social media and they are mixing their parliamentary things with their election things, which is wrong, right? So that's one thing. But the other thing is these lawyers. Now, a lot of the lawyers always say, "Oh, well, we can't give legal advice. We can't give legal advice. I'm sorry, you know, I can't give legal advice." But a lot of them have started to have these channels, right? Like Black Belt Barrister and also Alan Robert Shaw, who's got the Art and Media Law, which is sort of associated with this. And then Steve Barrett, that other barrister. And then there's that secret barrister as well. And they're all getting quite famous and high profile. Now, they'll always say in the videos, "Oh, I can't give legal advice, I can't give legal advice." But in a lot of the videos, they are actually giving their opinion on, they're talking about law, because that's what it's about. They're not selling hot dogs and they're not playing tennis, right? It's about law. And it's impossible for them to have a channel, right, about law and not talk about the law. Now, this is the thing. I always thought that, lawyers couldn't give free legal advice because they're not allowed to help you for free. You got to pay for it. But you can get pro bono where they volunteer. Now, when you take a case on, right, you work on a case and you've got to try and prove the case, right? Now, this is the thing. You can go to university and you can learn law, and a university lecturer or, will teach you the law. You're there to learn as a student, right? Learn the law. But that's in an educational setting, and when you are actually on a course, you've got, you're under a contract to learn, and they're the lecturer, right? No one's meant to be there who is not there to learn. Now, if you're self-taught, you read from books, right? People are allowed to publish books on law, right, and persuade. But this is the thing: when you write a book and publish a book, you're not employing a lawyer. Now, this is the thing. What I've started to realise is, when these barristers are getting a lot of airtime and a lot of video time, this is one thing that I've realised. They're starting to impose their opinion on what the law is and how to interpret it. Now, when you go into a court case, right, when you've got a case in a court, you're trying to prove something, right? You're trying to prove that you are right and the other person's wrong, right? It's like, prosecution and defence, or plaintiff and respondent, right? So one side is trying to prove that something means one thing, and the other side is trying to prove that it doesn't, right? Now, this is the thing. Therefore, unless you have a case and unless you employ a barrister, the law is not in contest, right? The law is only in contest when you are engaged in proceedings, because that's why you go into court, to contest it, right? And the other situation is when someone's teaching you it, and they're supposed to be teaching you it impartially. They're not actually trying to prove a case for or against. Now, the problem is that I've just kind of realised now with these channels is, when I'm watching these channels like Black Belt Barrister or, whichever it is, they talk about the law, and they when they're telling you, oh, this is the law, or this is what the law is, they're trying to, that's only their opinion of it, right? It's their opinion of the law and their belief in the law, right? So in a way, they're trying to impose you what they think the law is and how they think the law should be applied, whereas they might be wrong, because you could go into a court and disprove them. But the thing is, if everyone in the country is watching their channel and you believe them, right, and then that's what everyone thinks the law is, it's like in every case you have, you're going to try and you're actually going to be persuaded or influenced that position is the right one and that they're correct, but they might not be. Now, this is the thing. If lawyers were going round telling you, what the law was, like this is what the law is, right, then everyone would believe them, right? So if you had an opposite opinion, or if you didn't agree with them, or if you, how can you contest against that? But they're getting to contest the law, and they're getting to give their side an impression on the law outside of an active legal case. And they're not paid or qualified or acting as education. I don't know. You see, this is the thing. If you want to teach someone how to do origami, right, there's no law against that. But this is the thing. There is a lot. Why does the law exist that you can't give legal advice if you're a qualified or practicing barrister? Is because then... But that's why the law's there. So you can't just teach people things like origami or how to cook a sausage dog or whatever if you're a qualified paid barrister, because then you'll be giving legal advice, because you're not that. So only universities and colleges and so forth can teach people law, right? Unless, it happens to be your friend and they're just doing you, I don't know, a favour to actually represent you or something like that for free, unpaid. It's for your case. So I've come to a realisation that, why do they have this? Why bother with this thing? Oh, I can't give legal advice. Well, it's just not because you got to pay for it. These lawyers cost a fortune, like 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 grand, right? It's like, oh, I'm not going to give you something for free. I can't give you free legal advice, then I'd be doing you a favour, right? Actually, it's not actually about the money, because you can get pro bono, but when you're going to get pro bono, it's for one case, right? It's for a case. So this is the thing. Why can't you give free legal advice? Like, why can't you give free origami paper folding advice? Or why can't I teach you how to cook a hot dog? Because it's influencing people, and they'll be able to exert their own independent influence on what the law is. And that's actually what these channels are all starting to gradually do. They do sort of give case examples and things like that, but actually I've been watching these channels quite a bit, and what's actually happening on these channels is that they're actually, what they're actually doing is they are teaching you law. They're teaching you things about law, and they're also expressing their own personal view on the law, right? And even though they keep saying, oh, I can't give you legal advice, or I can't talk about this case or that case, right? It's not just about talking about a case, or I can't talk about a case, or I can't talk about a case. What they're actually doing is they are grooming the country, right, on law. And that's why you're not allowed to give free legal advice. Because if you give free legal advice, you can start dictating what the law is. And the whole point in law is that you're supposed to argue it in a court. Now, what they're actually really doing is they've ended up getting to a situation where they are not actually just arguing the law. They're saying, oh, this is what it is. They're saying this is what the law is, right? I'm right. These things that I'm saying are correct, but they might not be, because it's always arguable in a court. So I actually now realise that I think a lot of these channels are influencing. And then you've got like Aidan Eadley, right, who's been working for the Attorney General, but he's also training as a part-time judge, right, as an assistant judge. Now, there was a law, absolutely a law in the statutes, that says whenever anyone is serving as a judge, they're not allowed to continue in the business as a barrister. They're not allowed to practice in the business while they're serving as a judge. Why is that? Well, this is the thing. If you are serving as a judge in a court, and it's a court that sets a precedent, right? It sets a precedent on all other courts, and you're the judge, and you getting annoyed with all these other, barristers coming in and arguing cases, and if you're the judge and you're like, I'm sick of these barristers, right? I'm going to prove them wrong, right? If you've got some particular barristers who come in and prove things, and you really would like to, you don't like the fact that they're right, I know you're the judge, right? Well, you might have a jury there, and the jury might agree with them, right? Then, what you can do is, you can go get, someone or someone to bring a case and employ you, go into the court, and then you could put a case through to prove it, to make the precedent, right? So then next time you're a judge, you can say, oh, well, we set the precedent now, so it's it. So you can actually... It's like having a Sabutio or something like that. It's like having it's like basically having if you got a tennis game, right? Or anything like it's like the referee being able to control one side of the team. It's like having a computer game like, you know, computer game tennis, right? When like the referee has like a controller to control one of the players, right? So it's like having on a tennis match, right? When you've got the guy, you know, on the top of the, you know, like the referee guy on the top of the stair, you know, they've got those like things that you sit on a little bit like swimming baths, right? You know, there's tall stands, right? It's like the guy in the stand having a controller in his hand, and he's like actually controlling the one of the players, right? But he's meant to be the referee. It's you're getting into that sort of situation and territory, and the more and more barristers they get on YouTube and that lot, grooming the whole country, it's like that. It's becoming a bit like a university. And they keep saying, oh, I can't give legal advice, right? But I'll tell you how it is, you know, I'll tell you how it is, you know. You're only supposed to be told how it is if you're going on a university course for law, right? That's what the whole point of you can't give legal advice is. And they've ended up slipping past it, so I don't think that you're actually meant to have these channels at all. Now, you might say, well, you know, what about these, like, you know, you got Solicitors Regulation Authority. There are, I don't go on the channels, but there are a lot of channels when you get groups of solicitors and people like that, you know, and some of those probably are likely to be dodgy, even if they're not talking about their case. Oh, I can't talk about that case. Well, you know, it's a good job you can't talk about that case. That really would be a red light. But, you know, I don't actually think that they're allowed to teach law outside of the university, because that actually is given, it's almost kind of like specially licensed to do it. It's almost kind of like, you know, if you've got a science lab and you've got a special license to, you know, do research on psychedelics or something, you've got a special license. I think the law is actually kind of really meant to be like that, at least once you got the qualification, because, you know, black belt barrister, it's actually like karate, right? You know, in fact, black belt barrister, you know, this is the thing, once you talk karate, you've got a license to use it, but, you know, you've got a special license, you know, to defend yourself or whatever, but you can't misuse it or whatever. But this is the thing, if you've got a license to teach law at university, you're qualified and licensed to do it, and that's what you're doing. These people actually, although he's a qualified barrister, he's not a doctor he hasn't got a doctorate, right? He hasn't actually got a doctorate in law, I don't think, or a professor. You see, this is the thing, professors and doctorates and lecturers, that is what they're qualified to do. They are qualified to teach law, right? To teach it. Therefore, they're licensed to. But normal practicing barristers for the business are only licensed to, you know, take work on and do cases on a client-to-client basis, right? So unless you are a qualified teacher and licensed to teach law, and then you can tell people about law, but that's not representing them in a case, right? I don't think that some of these, because there's actually been quite a lot of misinformation I've found on these channels. Like, I mean, I like some of these guys. This is not a personal dispute or this is a professional thing, right? So, some of them have got things wrong. Like Alan, you know, Robert Shaw, it's like, you know, too much of a petitioning act, right? It was, you know, 5 people. But he's wrong. It wasn't 5 people, it was 20. So that's the thing. He wasn't qualified to teach you that, and he wasn't qualified to teach that university because he didn't know it, right? And therefore, if people are believing that and going out, you know, if they go represent themselves in a court and say it, they're wrong, right? And this is why you can't actually give legal advice. So I actually think that some of these barristers have been getting a bit carried away with themselves and what they're doing, to be honest. But that's something else to tackle.